At 2:13 a.m., every dog in the shelter stopped barking. Leah Morgan looked up from the intake desk. Silence was unusual during the night shift, but this felt different. It had happened all at once. A second earlier, the older shepherd in Kennel 4 had been scratching at his door. The hounds near the laundry room had been answering each other across the corridor. Then every sound stopped. Leah stood and walked toward the main kennel block. 31 dogs were pressed against the backs of their enclosures. None of them looked at her. Every head was turned toward Kennel 12. Kennel 12 was empty. Its previous occupant had been transferred 2 days earlier, and the enclosure had remained unused while a damaged drainage pipe was repaired. A folded blanket lay on the concrete floor beside a metal water bowl. The door was shut. The feeding hatch was closed. Nothing moved inside. Leah waited for one of the dogs to break its stare. None did. A faint scratching sound came from the empty enclosure. It lasted only a moment. Leah stepped closer. The shepherd in Kennel 4 backed away until his body touched the rear wall. His ears flattened. The scratching came again. 3 slow movements across metal. Leah called Evan Brooks from the treatment room. He arrived wearing disposable gloves and carrying a clipboard. "What happened?" "Listen." They waited. The scratching returned, softer this time. Evan looked toward the ceiling. Something could be inside the ventilation. That doesn't explain them. Leah pointed down the corridor. Every dog remained fixed on Kennel 12. Evan approached the enclosure and shone his flashlight between the bars. The blanket and bowl were undisturbed. He checked the identification card attached to the door. No intake since Tuesday. Leah unlocked her phone and opened the shelter's camera system. The overhead camera showed the entire enclosure. There were no blind spots large enough to conceal an animal. The kennel was empty. Evan tapped the door with the end of his flashlight. The dogs flinched. Something struck the metal from the other side. Both of them stepped backward. The feeding hatch trembled. It was a small hinged opening near the bottom of the door, intended for delivering bowls without entering an occupied enclosure. Its latch lifted slowly. Evan lowered his flashlight. The hatch opened inward. Nothing visible passed through it. For several seconds, the opening remained still. Then the blanket on the floor compressed. A deep impression formed in its center. The fabric shifted beneath the weight of something large enough to flatten it against the concrete. Leah checked the camera feed. The same indentation appeared on the screen. Nothing occupied it. The shepherd lowered his head. The dogs nearest Kennel 12 pushed themselves farther against their walls. One began trembling so violently that its collar tapped against the steel bars. The noise was small. Whatever rested on the blanket reacted immediately. The indentation disappeared. A new impression formed closer to the door. Then another. The water bowl slid across the floor and struck the wall. Evan reached toward his radio. Leah caught his wrist. The dogs were not merely afraid. They were trying to remain silent. Evan looked at her. She pointed toward the shepherd's collar. The animal had pinned its neck against the wall to stop the metal tag from moving. A scratching sound came from the inside of Kennel 12. It was lower now, closer to the door. Leah backed toward the intake desk and called Carla Ruiz, the shelter manager. Carla answered on the fourth ring. Leah kept her voice low. Something is inside Kennel 12. There shouldn't be anything in 12. I know. Did an animal get through the exterior run? The exterior gate is locked. A metallic groan echoed down the corridor. Leah turned. The lower corner of the kennel door had begun to bend outward. Evan aimed his flashlight at the latch. The steel bolt was shaking. On the camera screen, the enclosure remained empty. On the floor beneath the door, a damp mark appeared. Then a second mark formed beside it. Neither resembled a paw. Both were too long and narrow. Carla told Leah not to open the enclosure. She said she would reach the shelter within 15 minutes. The latch bent another fraction. Every dog in the corridor stared at the same point behind the steel door. The scratching stopped. Something heavy leaned against the metal, and the bolt began to slide. The bolt moved slowly across its housing. Evan pushed the door inward with his shoulder. For a moment, the pressure stopped. Then something struck the opposite side. The force threw him backward. The bolt remained in place, but its metal bracket bent outward. Leah guided Evan away from the enclosure. The dogs continued watching the door. None of them barked. Carla arrived 11 minutes later. She entered through the staff entrance and stopped when she saw the animals. What happened to them? Leah showed her the security recording. The footage captured the feeding hatch opening. It captured the blanket sinking beneath an invisible weight. It showed the water bowl sliding across the floor, but nothing appeared inside the enclosure. Carla checked the intake records herself. Every animal registered at the shelter was accounted for. The exterior exercise gate behind Kennel 12 remained locked. The maintenance hatch above it hadn't been opened. Carla watched the recording again. The blanket had compressed deeply enough to suggest something larger than most dogs. Keep the door shut, she said. Evan brought a container of pale cleaning powder from the supply closet. Carla directed him to scatter it through the feeding hatch without opening the main door. Leah held the flashlight. Evan crouched beside the hatch and pushed the powder across the concrete using a long plastic scoop. A thin white layer spread between the door and the blanket. Nothing happened at first. Then an indentation appeared near the back wall. Another formed beside it. The marks did not resemble paws. Each was narrow and elongated, with 3 deep points at the front. They moved slowly toward the blanket. The fabric compressed again. The powder closest to the door remained untouched. Carla recorded the marks on her phone. Could it be a projection? Evan asked. Leah looked at the bent steel latch. Projections don't do that. The marks changed direction. One appeared beside the water bowl. The next formed directly in front of the feeding hatch. Evan stepped away. The print was longer than his hand. Its deepest point had cut through the powder and into the moisture beneath. Carla called animal control. No one answered. She tried the emergency number. A recorded message asked her to leave a description of the incident. While she spoke, Evan's phone vibrated inside his pocket. The sound was brief. The kennel door exploded outward against its frame. The upper latch held. The lower bracket twisted almost completely free. Every dog recoiled. Evan silenced his phone. The pressure against the door stopped. Carla ended the call. The corridor became quiet again. Inside Kennel 12, the prints gathered near the damaged corner. 3 more appeared. Then the feeding hatch slammed shut. Leah studied the dogs. They were no longer looking toward the blanket. Their eyes were fixed on the gap beneath the damaged door. Something scraped across the metal. The lower bracket snapped. A screw struck the concrete and rolled toward the opposite wall. The door opened several inches. The overhead camera showed nothing passing through. But the cleaning powder shifted. One elongated print appeared outside the enclosure. Then another. The dogs turned their heads together. Their attention moved from the kennel to an empty section of corridor. Whatever had been inside was now standing between the 2 rows of cages. Evan reached for the emergency alarm. Leah grabbed his arm before he touched it. The creature had reacted to his vibrating phone. An alarm would fill the entire building with sound. Carla slowly stepped backward. The dogs followed something moving past Kennel 11, then Kennel 10. A water dish trembled behind the bars. The shepherd pressed his muzzle against the concrete. His eyes remained fixed on the empty corridor. Evan's keys slipped from his hand. They struck the floor beside his shoes. Every dog turned toward him. The metal bowl outside Kennel 8 lifted slightly. It flew across the corridor and hit the wall. Evan stumbled backward. 3 red lines appeared across his sleeve. The fabric split. Blood soaked through beneath the tears. He opened his mouth. Leah covered it before he could cry out. The dog stared at the empty space directly beside his shoulder. Something invisible breathed against the side of his face. Evan held his breath. The invisible pressure beside his face remained for several seconds. Then the dogs shifted their attention toward the opposite wall. Whatever had scratched him was moving away. Leah guided him backward without speaking. Carla reached the treatment room and quietly opened its door. The three of them entered. Carla closed the door without allowing the latch to click. Blood continued spreading across Evan's sleeve. Leah wrapped his arm with a clean bandage. The wounds were shallow but evenly spaced. Each mark stretched from his elbow toward his wrist. Carla turned her phone to silent mode. Leah and Evan did the same. Through the treatment room window, they could see the kennel corridor. The dogs were still tracking something. Their heads turned together as the invisible creature passed their enclosures. When it stopped, they froze. When it moved, their eyes followed. Leah pointed toward a large retriever near the center of the corridor. The dog was staring directly at the treatment room door. Something brushed against the glass. A cloudy mark appeared on the surface. It resembled condensation from a slow breath. Carla reached beneath the desk and disconnected the room's telephone. The retriever's attention shifted. The mark on the glass faded. A silent message appeared on Carla's phone. The automated feeding system was scheduled to activate in 6 minutes. 31 metal bowls would fill simultaneously. The mechanism was loud enough to wake the entire building. Carla showed the screen to Leah. The control panel was located at the far end of the kennel corridor. There was no remote shutoff. Evan started toward the door. Leah stopped him. His injured arm would make the journey harder. She removed her shoes and left them beside the treatment table. Carla unlocked the door carefully. Leah stepped into the corridor. The nearest dogs looked beyond her left shoulder. She moved in the opposite direction. The floor felt cold beneath her feet. A loose leash hung from a hook near Kennel 7. Leah lifted it away from the wall before its metal clasp could swing. The dogs continued watching the darkness behind her. She passed Kennel 6, then Kennel 5. The shepherd suddenly turned his head. His eyes moved toward the floor beside Leah. She stopped immediately. A wet footprint formed on the concrete less than a foot from her ankle. Its 3 elongated points faced toward her. Leah remained motionless. The creature shifted. Another print appeared ahead of her. The dogs followed it. Leah waited until their eyes moved toward the opposite side of the corridor. Then she continued. The feeding system displayed 2 minutes remaining. She reached the control panel and entered Carla's access code. The screen requested confirmation. Leah pressed the button. The countdown disappeared. At that moment, a burst of static came from the staff lockers behind her. An old handheld radio had activated inside one of them. The sound filled the corridor. Every dog turned toward the lockers. The doors rattled. Something struck the nearest one hard enough to dent the metal. The radio continued hissing. Leah crouched behind the feeding station. Another impact shook the lockers. One door opened several inches. A dark coat hanging inside lifted from its hook. Its sleeves moved as though something were pushing between them. Carla appeared at the treatment room doorway. She held up her phone. A message filled the screen. The shelter's announcement speakers could be controlled from the front desk. One speaker was mounted directly above Kennel 12. Leah understood. If the creature followed sound, they could guide it back inside. Evan moved toward the intake office. His face had become pale beneath the bloodless emergency lighting. He reached the speaker controls and selected Kennel 12. A soft tone sounded inside the empty enclosure. The dogs turned away from the lockers. Their heads moved together toward the far end of the corridor. The coat dropped back onto its hook. A wet footprint appeared beside Kennel 9. Another formed near Kennel 10. The invisible creature was following the sound. Leah watched the shepherd. His eyes moved toward the empty enclosure. Then he stopped. Unlike the other dogs, he turned back toward the lockers. His ears flattened. Something scratched softly from inside. At the same moment, the blanket in Kennel 12 began to sink. There was weight inside the enclosure again, but the shepherd was still staring in the opposite direction. The blanket inside Kennel 12 sank beneath an invisible weight. Evan kept the speaker running. A low electronic tone filled the enclosure. Most of the dogs followed the sound. Their eyes settled on the empty blanket. Leah reached for the remote door controls. The older shepherd continued staring at the staff lockers. She hesitated. Carla motioned for her to close the kennel. The invisible weight shifted again. A metal bowl rolled across the floor inside the enclosure. Leah pressed the button. The door swung shut. Its emergency latch locked automatically. Evan silenced the speaker. The corridor became quiet. For the first time since the incident began, several dogs stepped away from the backs of their enclosures. One approached its water bowl. Another lowered its head and laid down. Carla wrapped a heavy chain around the damaged kennel door. She added a second padlock. Nothing struck the metal. The blanket remained compressed. "It's inside," Evan whispered. Leah looked toward the shepherd. He was standing near the front of his enclosure. His attention remained fixed on the lockers. Carla called animal control again. This time, an emergency operator answered. She described an unidentified animal trapped inside a damaged enclosure. She did not mention that the animal could not be seen. 2 officers arrived shortly before sunrise. They inspected the damaged latch and the unusual marks in the cleaning powder. One photographed Evan's injured arm. The other checked the kennel camera. He saw an empty enclosure and a blanket pressed almost flat against the concrete. Neither officer offered an explanation. A transport crate was positioned against the kennel door. Using the feeding hatch, they pushed the compressed blanket into the crate with a long pole. The crate dipped beneath a sudden weight. Its metal base touched the floor. The officers secured the door and loaded it onto their vehicle. One of them checked the digital scale beneath the transport platform. The crate weighed nearly 90 pounds more than it should have. Carla watched the truck leave. She ordered the shelter closed for the day. The remaining dogs would be moved to temporary holding rooms, while the damaged corridor was inspected. Evan went to the hospital for treatment. Carla stayed outside to speak with investigators. Leah returned to the intake desk to copy the security recordings. The shepherd remained in his enclosure. He had refused to follow the other dogs into the temporary rooms. Leah opened the footage from the moment Evan activated the speaker. The recording showed the blanket sinking inside Kennel 12. It showed the dogs turning toward the sound. Then Leah noticed the shepherd. While the others followed the noise, he turned toward the staff lockers. She replayed the footage more slowly. A second dog near the laundry room had done the same. For less than 2 seconds, both animals stared at the open locker. Then the louder movement inside Kennel 12 drew the younger dog's attention away. The shepherd never looked back. Leah opened the camera covering the locker corridor. The image was partially blocked by a cleaning cart. She adjusted the angle. One locker door stood slightly open. A dark coat hung inside. The fabric moved. Leah stopped the recording. The coat was her own. She had left it there at the beginning of her shift. She resumed playback. The shoulders of the coat rose slowly. Its sleeves expanded around something with no visible arms. The zipper pulled upward without assistance. The locker door closed from the inside. Leah looked through the intake office window. The staff corridor appeared empty. The shepherd began scratching at his enclosure. Not loudly, only enough to make her look. His eyes were fixed on the doorway behind her. Leah turned toward the security monitor. The live camera showed her standing alone at the desk. Then the hook beside the staff entrance bent downward. Her coat appeared beneath it. No one was wearing it. The sleeves hung loosely, but its shoulders remained lifted at the height of a standing person. Leah stepped backward. The coat moved. Wet marks appeared on the floor below it. 3 narrow points pressed into the concrete. The shepherd flattened himself against the back wall. Outside, Carla knocked on the glass entrance door. The sound rang through the empty lobby. The coat turned toward her. Leah reached for the emergency lock. Before she could touch it, the old radio inside her coat pocket switched on. A burst of static filled the room. The zipper opened. The coat slipped from invisible shoulders and dropped to the floor. The shepherd's eyes followed something moving across the lobby. Carla knocked again. The glass entrance door bent inward. The kennel had never been empty. Neither was the hallway behind her.